What's up, degenerates? Me, AAA, back once again. Today I will be starting a short series about a prominent feminist here on YouTube named Marina Shutup. This one is why it's racist to be colorblind. Let's dive right in, shall we?
So today we're going to talk a little bit about colorblindness. Not physical colorblindness, but racial colorblindness.
More like you're just going to regurgitate the tripe that you read in Eduardo Bonilla Silva's book, Racism Without Racists.
A lot of people grow up nowadays under the assumption that it's a good thing to be colorblind, which means that you don't judge people based on their race. And I can understand how people would be like, well, duh, that's how you solve racism. Besides, racial prejudice seemed to be the cause of past injustices against people of color, right? However, the problem with this idea is that it assumes that racial prejudice no longer exists, which I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's not the case.
This video kind of had me scratching my head thinking, how the hell does she come to this conclusion? Then I realised about halfway through that she's under the misconception that being quote-unquote colourblind means you think race does not exist and is not a factor of who someone is. This couldn't be further from the truth, in my opinion. To me, colourblindness is the act of going beyond the colour of someone's skin to judge them by their actions and their character, regardless of implicit or racial bias.
The idea of being colorblind has made race a taboo subject to talk about. The act of talking about race has become racist in itself, which I think stems from a fundamental misunderstanding that a lot of people have about racism. First off, it's okay to notice race. As much as people try to assert that they don't see color unless they're physically blind, then pretending not to see someone's race is pointless.
Here, she misrepresents the subject completely. It is not colourblindness that makes race a taboo. It's white guilt. White people don't want to talk about race because automatically white people are blamed for all the ills of the world. And I can see why people are sick of racial discussion when it just leads to more recrimination and implied guilt. Just because someone who looked like them did something hundreds of years ago.
For example, I'm a mixed race Asian American. That is an undisputable fact about me. I don't have a problem with people noticing this about me because it's not a bad thing to be. Personally, I get a little skeeved out when people try and pretend that my racial identity doesn't exist at all.
This section kind of made me scratch my head as well, because the wording she uses here is telling, to say the least. Asian is not a bad thing to be. So, which race would you consider bad to be?
When someone says something like, you don't seem like a black person or an Asian person or whatever, meaning that person defies the societal expectation of what that race should be, then that's actually really racist. First off, that denies that person's racial identity and experiences. Second off, it says you don't seem like the specific race because you don't adhere to the stereotypes associated with it. Someone adhering to or not adhering to the stereotypes of their race doesn't invalidate their racial identity and lived experiences. This is also usually said in an attempt to compliment someone, which is actually super gross and insulting.
I'll agree that expecting people to fit racial stereotyping is retarded. But that has nothing to do with colourblindness at all. Being colourblind is not expecting everyone to fit a specific stereotype. Quite the opposite, in fact. You really don't get this whole colourblind thing, do you?
The second point I want to make is that individual prejudices aren't the only contributing factors to racism. We're going to look at racism as two forms. Individual racism, which is on a person-to-person level, and systemic racism, which involves the way that society is structured to benefit some races more than others. Even if a person doesn't participate in individual racism and discrimination, it still doesn't get rid of the institutions in society that disadvantage people of color.
So remember, kids, even when you're not racist, you're still fucking racist. I'll say the same I do to all idiots who spout this institutional or systemic racism bullshit. Name me one law or legislation or even a system which actively discriminates against people of colour. Just one. They can't do it. No one can. But I can name 10 that discriminate against white people. mostly all under the guise of affirmative action or civil rights.
For example, the criminal justice system. People of color, black men in particular, are much more likely to be racially profiled and stopped, and also experience violence than white people. Even though white people commit crimes at equal rates to people of color, the disproportionate stopping of black men leads to higher rates of arrest and mass incarceration. There are also many instances of police brutality against black men and black women that you're probably already aware of that leads to the unjust murders of these people by police.
Right, firstly, I want to address the whole concept of mass incarceration. I think personally anyone who uses the term in a serious way is a fucking moron of the highest order. Anyone sent to prison in this day and age for any crime is exactly where they are supposed to be. As a white man who has been to prison and who's been entangled in the criminal justice system, I know there is a thing called evidence, which is needed for a conviction to happen. Some of you might say, well, you're from the UK and it's different, to which I say, bollocks. You still need evidence that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that you are guilty. I've had instances where I was caught banged to rights, but had charges dropped because of lack of evidence. And this was 15 years ago. I can say I am now an upstanding law-abiding citizen. Well, other than being an arsehole on the internet, of course. And secondly, this oversimplification is completely misrepresentative of the facts. While it's true, white people commit a similar amount of crime, there are a few factors you need to consider to gain a more nuanced view of the situation. A. Population size and demographics. B. The type of crime committed by each group. Now, if you take all arrests for white people and all arrests for black people, regardless of anything else, you will see that white people actually commit slightly more crime than black people. But if you look a little deeper and bring population and demographics into the equation, it normalizes the fact that 63% of the population actually commit more crime. It's just law of averages. More people equals more crime, yeah? That's fairly normal. But then if we look at the amount of black crime and their population numbers, that starts to show a worrying statistic that 13% of the population commit nearly as much crime as a group that makes up 63%. Even more worrying still is that the demographic responsible for nearly all of this crime make up just 5% of the population. Then if we look deeper still into the type of crime committed, you will see that white people are statistically more likely to commit misdemeanor offences, whereas black people are statistically more likely to commit violent crimes. As a white person, it is 35 times more likely that you will be assaulted by a black person than the other way round. Also, 200 times more likely to be the victim of armed robbery by a black person than the other way round. Racial profiling is there for a reason. It is based in fact. And facts are not racist.
On the surface, you can look at each separate case of racial profiling as an act of individual racism, but these cases add up to form a criminal justice system that disproportionately disadvantage and harm people of color. This is what we call institutional racism.
This is complete bollocks. While racial profiling is shitty if you're a law-abiding citizen, racial profiling is there for a reason. If black people didn't commit disproportionately more crime than other races, they would not be profiled as such. Law enforcement as a whole didn't just wake up one morning and say, right, from now on, we're just going to pick on the black people. Also, if you're a law-abiding citizen and you comply with the police, you have nothing to worry about.
So the problem with colorblindness is that it makes these issues taboo to talk about.
No, it doesn't. The elicitation of white guilt does. This video is a perfect example of how feminists and SJWs use mental gymnastics to make something fit their outrage agenda. It doesn't matter if that thing is the most unracist thing in the world, they will somehow twist it to fit their warped narrative and make it the most racist thing in the world.
Police brutality becomes a problem caused by something other than racism, so we look for ways to justify it. If Michael Brown wasn't killed because he's black, because we supposedly live in a colorblind society, then it must have been another factor at work. It doesn't matter how many black boys and men are unjustly killed, the ideology of colorblindness makes race irrelevant.
It's funny you use the example of Mike Brown, a known felon who had just robbed a store, assaulting someone in the process. Then, when stopped by Officer Darren Wilson, he proceeded to attack the officer and attempt to take his weapon. If a police officer stops you, you don't try to fight them. It's just fucking common sense. Look at every single case of a black man being shot by a police officer, and what is the one thing they all have in common? Non-compliance and resisting arrest. Mike Brown wasn't shot because he was black. He was shot because he was stupid. He broke the law, then tried to fight his way out. Anyone with 2 brain cells could tell you this is not a good idea. Colorblindness is not accountable for stupidity.
It's basically like saying this. Hey, let's talk about Latina immigrant women and how they're often relegated to low-paying domestic labor and service jobs. Oh, and also their race, class, gender, and citizenship make them particularly vulnerable to abuse and exploitation. And then if someone were just to come up and say, yeah, but we're like one race, man, the human race. Like, cool, but how does that solve the problem? I don't see color, man. Okay, but that doesn't actually fix anything. Wow, like, quit being so racist. Basically, it makes no fucking sense.
No, what makes no sense is this skit. Literally no one would say these things. And also, not all white people are Tommy Chong.
That's racist!
The Latino immigrants are not relegated to these types of jobs. Education has a large part to play in why a large percentage of immigrants are found to work low-wage, menial jobs. The fact that most Latin American countries either have an incompatible or subpar education system couldn't be something to do with this, could it? Nah, couldn't be, could it? I think Marina should change the name of this video to I don't understand how this works, so it's racist.
The ideology of colorblindness assumes that our society has fixed racism, which is obviously not true. All of us are raised with implicit biases about race, and pretending that they don't exist and don't cause harm only causes us to perpetuate these biases.
This is completely backwards. The whole point of colorblindness is to go against implicit and racial bias, not enforce them.
If we're no longer allowed to talk about race, then how are we going to question and challenge systemic racism?
How can we not talk about race when feminists and SJWs claim everything is racist?
Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out.
Which obviously is ridiculous, but in closing, to say colorblindness is racist is to spit on the work and memory of the father of colorblindness and one of the most prominent figures of the civil rights movement.
Because I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
But he's racist for saying that, right? Oh no, wait. I remember you saying that black people can't be racist. So it's just all the white people that follow the teachings of Martin Luther King that are racists, yeah?
Hey moron! Fucking moron!
I've been your host AAA. Like, subscribe, share, visit the Patreon, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace!
Check your privilege, check your